Hi there history fans, and welcome back to another reaction video. Today we're continuing with the Napoleonic Wars from Epic History TV. So today we have the video called Napoleonic Infantry Tactics, a quick guide. If you didn't watch my cover of the Battle of Toulon, the info card is going to be somewhere here, and then you can come back and watch this one. So I like that they included this one here because the major battles are going to come now. So, you know, like Waterloo, Leipzig, all, you know, like the big battles that we know. And those were mostly, or most of them that we learn about, were land battles. So infantry tactics, cavalry tactics, artillery tactics are very important for the covering of the Napoleonic Wars in Europe, which shaped the history of Europe, like, definitely in a big way. It depends on the country and on the individual who you ask if it's a positive or negative way, but it's debatable. Okay, so if you have any additional information, corrections on stuff that I'm going to say, or just interesting stuff, just put it down in the comment section below. If you want to join our history community, just hit the subscribe button and the notification bell that you get notified when new videos come out, and also when new videos come out on the Napoleonic War series from Epic History TV. Okay, let's jump into the video. It's only, what, almost 6 minutes long, so... Okay, I'm interested how they're going to cover this one. And if they're only going to talk about the infantry tactics that Napoleon introduced, or which the French army had, or is he going to talk about the infantry tactics at that time in Europe in general? So, let's see.
In the Napoleonic Wars, infantry fought in close order, packed together, standing shoulder to shoulder. But why present such an easy target for the enemy? First, command and control. Before radios, orders had to be relayed by shouted commands, drums or bugles. Difficult enough in the smoke and din of battle. Almost impossible if troops were scattered. Second, firepower. Smoothbore muskets were inaccurate beyond about 80 yards, so volley fire, firing en masse, was the best way to inflict physical and psychological damage on the enemy. Third, morale. Soldiers were much more willing to advance into danger or hold the line if they did so together as a unit, urging each other on. Fourth, defense against cavalry. Scattered infantry were easy targets for horsemen. Only by sticking together could they fight them off. The basic tactical unit...
Okay, let's just go back. Okay, yeah, definitely. If your units are closer to you, they can more easily hear orders. And yeah, that's kind of logical for that time period. Maximizing firepower, of course, because as he said, like, the muskets weren't that accurate at that time. There are some videos on YouTube that you can check out on how precise those muskets were and on which distance. And he also mentioned, and at the second point, the morale. Yes, a lot of people also forget that also in the 19th century, beginning of the 19th century and throughout the 19th century and so on, a lot of troops still retreated and tried to rout and, you know, like leave and so on. So the main focus of an army when they conflicted each other was actually to rout the enemy army, still back then at the beginning of the 19th century or in the Napoleonic Wars. Why? Because just imagine yourself on a battlefield, cannons firing, you know, like thousands of muskets and so on, and then you see your own man fleeing, and that has a big psychological effect for you, on you. And then it made it more likely that the men who are now entering the battle like second lines and so on, that they're also going to rout. Moral support, yeah, of course. The more people fight with you shoulder to shoulder, the more like it is a morale boost. And defense against cavalry, definitely, because the bayonet that they attached to the front of the musket, that they could use as a spear in this square formation to defend themselves against cavalry. Back then, cavalry was still a valuable option for the army, but as muskets and guns in general, like with gunpowder and so on, while they still evolved, the cavalry was less and less important. Especially, it kind of deteriorated during and after the First World War, and of course prior to the First World War, but as the machine guns started to develop, so high capacity shooting guns.
But they fight them off. The basic tactical unit of infantry was the battalion. A French line battalion had, in theory, 840 men, but in practice, nearer 500 to 600. Our example here has 605 men, a typical strength for a battalion on campaign. The men were divided into 6 companies, 4 fusilier companies, and 2 flank companies. On the right, the grenadiers, made up of the tallest, strongest men, often detached to form elite all-grenadier units. And on the left, the voltigeurs, specialist light infantry, used for skirmishing in front of the battalion. Skirmishers moved independently, used cover, and fired at will to harass and unsettle the enemy, while preventing enemy skirmishers carrying out the same task. Most armies also had specialist light infantry units for this role, such as the British 95th Rifles, French Chasseurs à Pied, and Austrian and Prussian Jäger battalions.
Jäger battalion, yeah.
The traditional battlefield formation was the line. All companies formed up alongside each other, 3 ranks deep. Line formation maximized the number of men who could fire their muskets at the enemy, and limited casualties from artillery fire.
Yep.
But it was extremely vulnerable to cavalry if it could be outflanked. And even for well-drilled troops, it was difficult to keep the line straight while advancing across broken ground. So for maneuver and attack, battalions usually formed a column of divisions. This was a more flexible formation that allowed the battalion to advance quickly, though it presented a larger target to enemy guns, firing solid round shot that would tear through several ranks, and far fewer men could fire their musket.
A lot of people, when they talk about these line formations and so on, especially the ones, as we saw, like where all the units are like stretched in a thin line, and when we watch the movies and so on, we always ask ourselves the questions like, you know, like how crazy or how brave do you need to be to stand in a line and, you know, like advance to the front while the enemy is shooting at you, and, you know, like your soldiers are falling besides you and so on. So it was actually a pretty psychologically draining experience, let's call it that way. And as far as I know, but correct me if I'm wrong, there were also some medical records that showed signs of what we know today of PTSD in the army of Napoleon and armies back then. Of course, we know that it became a bigger thing throughout the First World War. Shell shock, PTSD, and so on. But as far as I know, there were also some medical records from back then that people had kind of a, you know, like, it wasn't, of course, called that way, you know, like shell shock or psychological, whatever, PTSD. But correct me if I'm wrong.
It's at the enemy. Theoretically, therefore, the battalion would deploy into line before reaching the enemy. But carrying out this slow manoeuvre under fire wasn't always possible or sensible. So some commanders kept their men in column, relying on momentum to break the enemy line. This was a risky tactic that often worked against raw troops, but led to high casualties when facing better trained infantry, like British redcoats. A column could be closed up quickly to provide protection from cavalry, or if there was time, could form a square. With bayonets fixed, the battalion
then the
formed
cavalry,
an all-round defense that often resembled
cavalry
more of a
couldn't do
rectangle.
anything.
Enemy cavalry could surround the battalion, but not break in, as horses won't charge a solid wall of men and steel. But an infantry square was extremely vulnerable to artillery fire, and could only move very slowly. Changing quickly and smoothly from one formation to another, especially under fire, required training, practice, and experience. In 1809, the Austrian army began to use the battalion mass formation, crude but more suited to hastily trained conscripts. This was a dense column with limited firepower and huge vulnerability to enemy cannon.
Yep.
But it could quickly close up to repel cavalry using the same principle as the square, but without the complex drill, and was much more maneuverable.
The thing, as he said, like before, like muskets were started to be used on a battlefield in a more common way, which was especially used in the Napoleonic Wars, but also prior to that. The time that you needed to train a unit for like the warfare before that, like an archer, a swordsman or a knight or whatever, it took a very long time to get a professional soldier out to the battlefield. But with introducing of the muskets and firearms at that capacity, you only needed to, you only needed to shoot properly at a target. So, I mean, I don't want that you feel that it's that I want to oversimplify the thing. It is, of course, complicated and so on. And of course, you could. They always try to train the units to reload as fast as they can, to shoot as precise as they can, and so on. But a training of a unit at that time was way quicker than the training of the units before that. And that meant that they could recruit more units to the battlefield. And that's why you see more and more casualties on the battlefield, because, like the states were just take anybody who could hold a gun and put them on the battlefield. But yeah, interesting. They're now just talking about the Battle of Austerlitz, Jena,
Thanks to all
Friedland.
our Patreon supporters for making this series possible. Find out how you too.
Yeah, big thanks also to the patrons. That's what I also said in the last video. A big shout out to the patrons that also support Epic History TV, because patrons make it really possible for creators to do videos like this, and I'm pretty sure every creator on YouTube appreciates their patrons. Okay, I hope that they're going to talk. I hope that they're going to talk more in general about the tactics of cavalry and artillery back then, and also one important thing about the supply lines that were used for the Napoleonic campaigns throughout Europe. But yeah, a very interesting thing, and I also like how they made that concept how they put this info as already the second topic on their list, just to inform people what they how it looked like in general back then. Okay, I hope that you enjoyed it. If you have any corrections, additional information, interesting stuff, as I said, just put it down in the comment section below. I will appreciate it. Our community is going to appreciate it. And yeah, if you want to be part of our community, just hit the subscribe button, the notification bell, so that you get notified when new videos come out. And until the next time, see ya.